stream. That's when I make a beeline for the tree line. That's when I make a beeline for the tree line.
Yeah, I know that this is a day late. I am more than well aware of it, but I need to mentally prepare myself. And not only that, Fortnite NFL pretty much took all my energy. So, today you are getting this review, and you're getting the review that's actually scheduled for today. And unfortunately, today's review is not going to be very fun. Because sure, we have an amazing, excellent episode in Not Normal, but we also have Gone. An episode that I loathe. So, you guys know how it works by now. So welcome back to Animation Station. Welcome back to Chapter 6. Let's talk about the good episode first before we dive headfirst into the pits of hell. This is probably one of, if not my favorite episode of the season, excluding the one that you obviously already know about that we're going to get to way, way later in this marathon. But Not Normal is one of the last episodes that I saw before I stopped watching SpongeBob altogether. I saw advertisements for it, and I watched the episode itself, and I enjoyed it as a kid. But I wasn't sure how it would hold up now, because a lot of people seem kind of split on it. But watching it again, I gotta say that this is one of my favorite episodes of the season, still, and I consider it a fantastic episode that belongs up there with the classics. Yeah, I know, that's weird for me to say in Dark Era SpongeBob, I know, but this is a fantastic episode in every single way, shape, and form possible, and there is a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time and dive straight into Not Normal. So, in this episode, SpongeBob gets bawled out by Squidward for not being normal. So SpongeBob does his best to be normal, including working a boring job at a desk with a computer, which he uses to make Krabby Patties instead of flipping burgers. Then he has his house look like a real house, and slowly but surely he turns into a smooth popsicle. But then it turns out it's not all that he bargained for, and he learns how important it is to be individual, like to have individuality. And I think the episode itself did this really well. Tom Kane's voice acting in this episode is fantastic. He makes SpongeBob sound so, boring. I know it sounds like a backhanded compliment, but it really goes to show his prowess as a voice actor, because he's able to make SpongeBob one of the most energetic, bubbly characters in all of animation into a dull, boring, and dang near emotionless character. And he does boring SpongeBob so well. When SpongeBob becomes normal, it is just hilarious to watch, because it's also kind of like a commentary about how normal, the old saying, normal is overrated, which I personally stand by 100%, but I know some people disagree. There are a lot of highlights with this episode. It's one of the funniest of the season, and it's one that I find being more and more relatable the older I get, being anything but normal myself. So there is a lot of highlights to talk about with this episode, starting with highlight number 1. Yes, his house. When Squidward first sees that his house is now like a real house, just like in the little VHS tape that SpongeBob watched, and his reaction to it is not only shock and awe, but him slapping himself in the face. That part's so funny. I don't know why it's so funny, because it's not the first time we've seen Squidward do that, but for some reason in this episode, the way they do it, from the timing to the animation to how quick it is, I don't know, it just gets me every time. It's so funny. Then highlight number 2 is just normal SpongeBob. Every single scene of normal SpongeBob, he is ridiculously funny, being so over-the-top boring. It's really hard to explain without you seeing the episode for itself, but it is so, so clever. Once you see it, it'll make a lot of sense, and it is it is funny. It is so funny seeing him acting so out of character, normal, and dull. And then when he finds out it's not all it's cracked out to be, he goes to Patrick for help, which is usually where an episode like this would fall apart, but like I said, this has a lot of classic attributes to it because Patrick in this episode is actually really nice and helpful, and he tries to get SpongeBob to return to abnormal again because he found out that normal ain't all it's cracked out to be. So, yeah, credit to Patrick in this episode. He's actually pretty good. I got very reminiscent vibes of like Something Smells from season 2 out of Patrick. Like, this is an underrated Patrick episode, absolutely. He is very good in this episode. Which, considering how Dark Era Patrick is one of the worst characters in animation, yeah, that is saying something. So, it's nice to see him actually being a decent character for once. And then my final highlight is Handsome Squidward. Like, the final straw of SpongeBob realizing that normal is not all it's cracked out to be is the way that he ends up unknowingly insulting Squidward when he tries to give him suggestions on how himself to be normal. And then Squidward takes this to heart and becomes normal Squidward. Not only is the image funny, and it's another episode image that I'm surprised did not become a meme, but the way it actually works into the final climax of the episode with it being so terrifyingly normal that it scares SpongeBob back to abnormality. Like, that is just a perfect way to end the episode after Squidward became so used to liking normal SpongeBob as he kept becoming more and more normal. And then for him to actually become normal himself and scare SpongeBob back to what he's supposed to be, retain the status quo. It's funny, and it's legit clever. Do I have any problems with the episode? Yeah, one, and it's the paper patties thing. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, yeah, I get it. The more normal he gets, the more artificial the product becomes, which I get it's probably supposed to be commentary, but I don't know. I feel like there should have been more of a lead up into it, because it's just like one montage of SpongeBob becoming normal and normal and more normal until he's perfectly normal. And then you have the paper patties immediately after with no lead into it outside of that one little montage. It's hard to explain, but once you see the episode, you'll get it. I also think they should have had Sandy in this episode, because I would have liked to see how she would have reacted to SpongeBob being normal. That would have actually been really fascinating. But, as it is, this episode is fantastic. Absolutely just completely and utterly fantastic. I have always loved this episode. I'm always going to love this episode, and it only gets better every time I watch it. And like I said, the more relatable, the older I get, because I am anything but normal. Let me tell you. But for me, I know this might be controversial because some people, again, are very mixed on this episode, and I get it. But to me, as someone who gets the humor, as someone who gets the commentary, it is a very enjoyable, very entertaining episode that only gets funnier every time I watch it. Final verdict for this episode's a 10. First 10 out of 10 of Season 6, and highly underrated episode. If you have not watched this episode yet, you need to. It is one that I definitely recommend you give a watch. This season's not good, but this is by far one of its best episodes. Okay, time to flip the switch the other way, because it's time to talk about what I consider one of the worst episodes in all of SpongeBob, period. Let's talk about Gone. I hate this episode. I absolutely hate it. Now you may be saying, oh, you don't get the commentary of this one like you did with Not Normal. No, I get what they're trying to do, but what they're doing is so mean-spirited and just awful that I'm not going to even try to defend it. I'll give them this. The Christine thing was a cool idea, and they do horror parodies all the time, especially nowadays, so it's not out of the ordinary. But outside of that, and again, Tom Kenny's voice acting, which tries to carry this episode, but unfortunately, not even he can save it, because the plot of this episode is garbage. Let me do my best to explain it in detail. as best as I can without getting too angry, because while I do think this is personally one of the worst episodes of the entire franchise, I'm trying to be a little bit more professional from now on. Outside Fortnite NFL streams, there I just can't control myself. So, let's talk about Gone and why I despise this episode so much. So, in this episode, SpongeBob wakes up to the entirety of Bikini Bottom being, well, gone. And this already takes up like a good third of the episode, him first being oblivious, because, oblivious SpongeBob being flanderized to obnoxious degrees in Dork Era. And he has a normal day as per usual. And it's not until the nighttime when he notices that everyone's actually gone. So that's a whole third of the episode we're already wasted on jokes that aren't even funny because it's not even like well written or anything. It's just SpongeBob being oblivious. And not enjoyably oblivious, like, dude, turn around kind of oblivious. But then we have the second of the 3 parts of the episode. I'm calling it 3 parts because it's pretty much segmented into 3 parts. The majority of it, where SpongeBob tries to live out the lives of all his Bikini Bottom friends because he thinks they're actually, like, well, up in the great gig in the sky, so to speak. And he does really good jobs impersonating... Sorry, I can't talk English today. He does a really good job doing impersonations of all the characters here. I don't think it's as great as it is in Mimic Madness, which we'll talk about when we get to Season 10, but this is very good voice acting from Tom Kenny, and he does an amazing job imitating everybody. Though I will admit, his Mr. Krabs sounds a lot like Ice King from Adventure Time. I guess the same voice actor, but it just gave me that reminiscence because of the inflections in his voice. I don't know, maybe it's just me. But I definitely got a lot of Ice King vibes from his impression of Mr. Krabs, which he does do better, again, in Mimic Madness. So, then after he tries to be Mrs. Puff, him impersonating the 2 female characters, Mrs. Puff and Sandy, is more than a little questionable. 1. How did he fit into their clothes? When I get he's a sponge and he can change his shape, but with Sandy in particular, there's no explanation. He's just somehow wearing that tiny bra and bikini like it's a DeviantArt picture. Despite the fact that, size-wise, it should not fit him at all. Oh, not to mention we had to watch him grow a tail out of his hind end. Stupid. I get it's one of Sandy's traits of her character design, but it is stupid beyond belief. Then, after that, we have to watch him be Mrs. Puff. And I do not know how he got her clothes either. And I can give it a little bit more leeway than I can with his impersonation of Sandy, because he actually tries to look like Mrs. Puff. He puffs out his shape, so to speak, to actually fit in the clothes. Whereas with Sandy, it's just him being normal with bra, bikini, and tail like it's something out of DeviantArt. No offense to DeviantArt, but you guys know the creepy images I'm talking about. So, he tries to impersonate Mrs. Puff, and he does a decent job at it. I do think it's one of Tom Kenny's weaker impersonations, but it's still a good impersonation. And then the whole episode decides to flip the other way for pretty much no reason. And it turns into SpongeBob getting his boating license, because no one's there to stop him. Then he gets a boat, and then the boat becomes Christine. Yeah, Christine, the John Carpenter movie Christine, based on the Stephen King novel of the same name. They try to do a horror parody of that in only like a total of 3 minutes in the entire episode. And yeah, as you can guess, it is extremely rushed, because you have one scene where it looks like they're, buddy, having a good time. And then you cut directly to him talking to a Krabby Patty meat thing of Patrick, showing that he's going crazy. And then it goes to 3 days later, where apparently now he's scared to death of the thing, with no transition or no actual, reasoning whatsoever. I get he's supposed to be going crazy, but we have done this plot so many times, so much better, in so many other SpongeBob episodes. This is by far the weakest version of it that I have seen, of him going crazy. Yes, worse than To Save a Squirrel, believe it or not. This episode, whatever. And if that wasn't already bad enough, the entire episode's pacing is agonizingly slow, despite the fact it rushes so many things. It's pretty much SpongeBob the entire episode, which gets unbelievably annoying. And then you have the final part of the episode. The most infamous part of the episode, and the thing that really sinks this down into the infamous category. So, how's this episode end? Well, SpongeBob goes crazy, and he's about to take an axe to a bus that pulls up to him. And that's when everyone in Bikini Bottom steps out. And Mr. Krabs reveals that they weren't in the Great Gig in the Sky, so to speak, because the reason why they were actually gone was to celebrate a self-imposed holiday called National No SpongeBob Day, where the entirety of Bikini Bottom leaves SpongeBob alone with no warning or no notice whatsoever, leaving him to be scared to death for his friends, and that they're actually, well, for lack of a better term, dead, while they go into some random area and burn a giant wicker man of him. Wow, not even Squidward would have done that in pre-movie SpongeBob. It is beyond insulting, it is beyond mean-spirited, and it does not fit at all. This entire episode is a jumbled up mess, and this ending only makes it worse, especially when Patrick is one of the people that went to this thing knowingly, despite the fact that he himself is SpongeBob's best friend. I would have ended his friendship right there and kicked him in the nuts for good measure. And then everyone else probably gets slapped upside the head, because that is mean-spirited, that is cruel, and that should end SpongeBob's friendship with all of you. If I was SpongeBob in that situation, I would tell them all to go screw themselves, because that is just horrible. That is a horrible thing to do. Not to mention, it is extremely out of character. Sure, some people like Squidward don't like SpongeBob, but they themselves admit that they need SpongeBob in a way. So for them to do this cruel thing, this horrible, horrible thing, something so low down and despicable that should not have even been belonged in a kid's show, it just makes the episode worse. And even the stinger of Patrick being the one that has to be by himself, it doesn't work. Because we see him alone all the time in almost every freaking episode of the show. It makes no damn sense, and it's not at all satisfying or cathartic. And the more I think about this episode, the angrier I get. It is a jumbled, cluttered, boring, dull, slow, monotonous, mean-spirited, cruel, and just garbage episode in every single way, shape, and form that has no redeeming quality whatsoever. Not even Tom Kenny, the great voice actor that he is, can save this utter train wreck. And the more I've watched this episode, the worse it got. At first I thought it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. But then when I looked at it again and analyzed it, yeah, this episode is garbage. It is absolute, just bottom of the barrel gutter trash. It is an episode that only gets worse every time that I am forced to sit through it. And I can tell you right now, after this review, I am never watching this episode again. In my opinion, it can burn in the pits of hell for all eternity. Leave this episode to drown in the ocean, because it is unredeemable. It is unwatchable. And it is the first episode of Season 6, and I'm giving a final verdict of a 0. 0 out of 10. One of the worst episodes of the season, arguably one of the worst episodes of the entire show, and I loathe it with every single fiber of my soul. And thankfully, after this episode review is done, I don't have to talk about it again. But yes, avoid this episode like the plague. It is not worth your time, and even though it may seem clever, that ending just ruins it. It is so cruel, mean-spirited, out of character, and just lazy. Not to mention SpongeBob himself being so oblivious when Mr. Krabs tries to phrase around the fact that he left SpongeBob alone. Someone who he treated like a son in the pre-movie era. Now he leaves behind without any care or worry whatsoever. And the worst part? This is not the last 0 out of 10 episode of the season, because there is some trash in this season. Is this the worst episode of the entire thing? It's hard to say, but I can tell you right now it's definitely top 3 worst. And I can see why people started leaving SpongeBob after this. Because after an episode like this, I wouldn't want to watch the show either. It is an abysmal, abominable trash fire that should never be watched by anyone. And I'm probably going to say this a little bit often, and I try, like I said, not to curse or anything, because, trying to be more professional. But for trash like this, there's only one last thing I have to say. Fuck this episode. Now let's move on to overall thoughts so I can go back to forgetting this episode even exists. Yeah, that was a pretty rough review to say the least, but the good news is it's done now, and I don't have to talk about that abomination ever again. And obviously no ranking, because Not Normal was by far the best of these 2 episodes, and again, Gone can go screw itself into the pits of hell for all eternity. But that's going to do it for this episode review. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sorry I got super, super angry at that second one, but it is an episode that I absolutely loathe, and I just needed to rip it to shreds. But thankfully next time, we actually have something a lot more pleasant, because we're going to talk about our first special of the season next. And this is a really good special, so I have a lot of positive things to say about the next review, so I'll see you guys next time when we dive into SpongeBob versus... We cannot take it anymore, the time has come.